First of all, I'd like to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your infinite patience and the incredibly light and jovial way you remind us of our truth. And I have studied so many spiritual processes and found so much truth inside of them, but always felt something that didn't feel right. And I've never heard you say anything that didn't feel true to me, that didn't feel helpful, that didn't feel giving.
That's a credit to your attraction, and here's what we mean by that. Because we know where you are in relationship to where you want to be, our method of teaching is finding the resonance, and once you're resonant with your own inner being, then you can hear where we go next. But if we haven't accomplished that resonance, then you can't hear, and then there's a gap. And so really that is all about your attraction. It's about your readiness. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to start by telling you that I'm ready to be ready to be ready to be ready.
We acknowledge that.
And that I've never prepared, I don't think, for anything in my life as much as being here. And I knew that I would get picked, and I knew I wouldn't have to fuss over it. And I have spent night after night clarifying that vortex, clarifying that desire, clarifying that purpose.
Oh, not just night after night, lifetime after lifetime.
Yes. And I have a few smaller questions, and then I have one question that feels monumental. And this question came to me the night after my wonderful beloved bought her tickets. And I saw myself in the room, and I saw myself asking this question, and all of it came out. And I wrote it down as soon as I came out of meditation. And then I read it, and I started to feel nervous because I was trying to figure out how to memorize it. Like, how do I say all of this? And I realized I could just read it to you. And so I brought a letter to read to you, if you'll allow me. And then I just have a few questions before, because a lot of strange things have happened to me in my life, and I would love a non-physical perspective on those things.
We'll be brief about it since it's old news.
Thank you. So she's so good. So the first one is one of the first trans-dimensional experiences I think I had consciously in my life. I was rock climbing, done a lot of things to risk my life, never been afraid of dying, but I was up on a rock very high, no rope, and I got nervous for the first time in my life, and there was no holds, nowhere to go, and my muscles started shaking, and it was like I blacked out for a second, and when I came back, I was higher up on the rock, and there was a handhold right there, and there's no way I would have missed it. And I got to the top, and I was beside myself going, what just happened? I was like, I don't know if that was an angel or the hand of God or I'm a superhero. I didn't know.
But what happens, we talked about momentum a little bit here today. Momentum is focusing and law of attraction, responding to the focus and then bringing more and then bringing more and then bringing more. So the short answer to this is, you said it was the first time in your life that you'd ever felt like that. Well, that means you hadn't given much airtime to that, which means you were in a really good place. You are accustomed to being in connection with your inner being. So in a moment that you were unsure, because of your practiced thought, your inner being was just dominant in that moment. And that's why it felt to you like you blacked out. Now, you didn't really black out. It's just that your inner being took dominance of your vibration in that moment. Often you're in that blended state. You just don't know it. But that was such a defining moment. Esther remembers being on a bus going up a sort of scary hillside, and the bus driver said, if you look down and it scares you, close your eyes. That's what I do. And Esther did not feel reassured because your inner being is always there with you. And because you'd done that, you see, everything about your physical apparatus is known by your inner being. Every impulse, every muscle movement. And so Does it really feel illogical to you in a moment when you were just beginning to get wavery in your thought, that your inner being would dominate so powerfully that your thought could not abide in that vibration? Doesn't it feel logical to you that when it really, really mattered, with all that you'd lived and all that you've practiced, that your inner being would be able to dominate when it really matters? Don't you hear stories like this all the time? Yeah, that's what happened. Call it angels if you want to.
I felt my inner being protect me a lot, actually.
Your inner being doesn't protect you from harm. Your inner being guides you to wanted.
Ah, nice. My next question is about a very deep experience that I had in meditation. I have 3 beings, entities, guides, soul friends. I don't know what they are. But in this one experience, I had been to a plant medicine journey and did not get the experience that I had hoped for. And in the process...
Because when something like a substance takes you out of consciousness, rather than source energy dominating your consciousness, it's a whole other deal. We like these 2 stories together.
Right, thank you. So these 3 beings began moving my body, and my physical body started moving, and they picked me up. And it was like I was crowd surfing. And they were raising my body up and down. There were 2 hands in the middle of my back. And I could see my energy begin to come out of my chest. And then my consciousness began to come out of my chest. And as I raised up, I could see my body below, but my feet were still stuck into my feet, and they didn't want to come out. They didn't want to let go. So I had to pull them to get them.
Well, you're describing sort of what we're describing here earlier, when your inner being is calling you and you're not going. That's a perfect experience to show you what it's like when your desire is lifting you, but your beliefs aren't letting you fully go.
Right. There was this way.
And your vivid translation of that really tells that story, doesn't it?
Right. So once I was free, I didn't have a body anymore, and neither did these 3 guides.
That's because most people have to reemerge into non-physical before they let go. Well, you're just the no-body part of the story that you were creating.
Well, as soon as I had no body, one of them flew through me from the back, straight through me, and then one flew through from the front, and I could feel that they were...
If you had no body, what were they flying through?
I know, that's my point. I don't know, but and they weren't visible anymore, but I knew what they were doing, and they went through me this way.
You were assuming what they were doing by the sensations that you were feeling, extrapolating from old beliefs and making up a story that fit the paradigm that you'd been sharing with yourself.
Well, what it felt like to me was that they were reminding me that I was no longer physical. They were reminding me that there's not a physical thing here. And then all 3 of them lined up in exactly the same space that I was, facing the same direction. And it felt like I was getting a download of lifetimes of information. And it felt like they were reading my lifetimes of information.
They weren't, because they're not interested in looking back. That's really a good thing to focus on here for a minute.
My question is, who or what are these beings? Because they felt tremendously familiar. It felt, or is it just a part of my game in my head and my interpretation of an experience?
Your game in your head, sure, but more important reason for that. All day, every day, what's going on with you, what's going on with us, what we are wanting you to accomplish is an understanding of how you fit in to the larger scheme of things, how you fit in with non-physical. And it's interesting because as you practice your thoughts of physicality, it takes something out of the ordinary to get you to accept the non-physical essence of who you are. And so we know for sure that you were at a point in your life when you were really wanting to understand the fullness of who you are, wanting to understand that non-physical part of who you are. Those were the questions that you were asking. And so this experience was just yielding to you vibrational blocks of thought that you were translating into that experience to give you as much information as you were ready to receive at that time.
So are these 3 beings part of my own consciousness, in other words, or are there actual soul family that we have in non-physical realm?
Yes, it's real. We don't want to label it hallucination. We want to call it interpretation of energy. So the energy is real, but the reason that we are clarifying in this way is because that energy is available to all of you, but your ability to receive it and translate it is uniquely your own. So we want to speak it in the way that we are speaking it to you, so that you'll get that you were tuned in, tapped in, turned on, that you were in the receptive mode, that what you were receiving is valid. And we want anybody else who's ever listening into this to not try to mimic that, because everybody's going to have their unique experience based upon the power of their desire and where the beliefs are at the time that they open up and let it flow. So let's call it source energy. Let's call it God force. Let's call it angels if you want to. Let's call it your spirit guides, which was sort of where you were then.
That's what it felt like was spirit guides.
Yeah.
So I have learned a tremendous amount from the Native American and Toltec traditions, the Naguals, but I've always felt this fear in that lineage, this fear of non-physical, this fear of what is outside of this realm.
Do you think they were transmitting it to you? Could it be your misinterpretation?
I don't believe so. I've read many of Castanada's books, and I feel fear in every single chapter. Afraid of this, afraid of that. You'll get trapped here. This being will eat you. There's all of this fear, and I've never felt that fear.
That's the distinction that we were offering to you earlier. That's the difference between someone who is, rather than being called by source, who is pushing away through some other means. We're really not big on the hallucinogenics and the things that a lot of people think they need to free them, because it doesn't free them, it just amplifies the thing they're trying to be freed from. Then the demons get real. They're not real. That's why we were describing to you in the way that we were. Your interpretation matters a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get to the letter, but before I read it, I brought a couple of gifts for you, and one of my favorite stories that you've ever told is of Esther moving her furniture around endlessly, and she didn't know why, and that people came to help her, and the guy was a hip-hop rap guy, and Esther loves rap.
She does now.
Right. So
when you listen to rap through the ears of source, it takes on new meaning.
Yes, and especially depending on who you listen to.
You can listen to all of it, all of that stuff. All of that stuff. Disregard the
words,
bumps in the language.
Yeah, and the focus on the chains and the this and the that.
Focus on the vibration that calls it forth. And there's power in all of it.
So I felt called to make Esther a mixtape. So I made Esther what's called an Abraham ecstatic mixtape. And it's 2 hours of music that I feel that people's souls shouldn't miss. I feel that Esther's soul won't want to miss. And it's got a lot of conscious hip-hop, no rims, no gold chains, and it's on a drive because I don't.
Is it all right if we give it to everybody?
Yes, ma'am, please.